Good morning, everybody. Sandy and I are really happy to be here this morning and talk about some of our research findings. I did want to just start out by saying that Sandy and I are both management scholars, and we're situated in the business schools of our respective universities. We've been studying the management of technology-based projects for the last 20 years or so. And our current research, which has been generously funded by NSF, has been examining the management of large, what we would call large scientific research collaboratory projects that include a large technology or cyber component. These projects are often referred to as cyber infrastructure projects, and you might be familiar with some of these, NEES, iPlant, TerraGrid. And GENI itself is also a cyber infrastructure project. We're motivated to study these projects in part because of the challenges that are associated with managing cyber infrastructure projects. You know, as you, I think, are well aware, these projects are very large and complex. They have a lot of different parts to them. There's a certain amount of risk and uncertainty that's associated with these projects, in part because the technology that's being used is new. It's not clear what will work, what won't work. And, you know, it's not even clear what things will look like at the end of the day. And all of this volatility introduces uncertainty and risk into a project. And while cyber infrastructure projects are generally they're designed to foster innovation and creativity, but they also face very real constraints in terms of budgets and schedules, and this makes them challenging to manage. In addition, cyber infrastructure projects draw in a lot of participants with different knowledge bases and who are distributed around the globe, and very often the stakeholders have different goals and motivations and incentives for participating in these projects. So this adds to the difficulty of managing these projects, of communicating, of controlling and coordinating the projects. So all in all, it makes for a very rich environment to do some research. Our overall objective in studying the GENI project is to identify mechanisms that can be used to effectively structure, govern, and manage cyber infrastructure projects. And in part, what we are trying to understand in achieving these objectives are the interaction patterns among the stakeholders. That is, who is interacting and communicating with whom. By studying these interaction patterns, we're able to analyze the evolution of the GENI community, and from that, we can draw out some mechanisms or techniques that are appropriate for controlling, coordinating, communicating, and managing such projects. The approach that we've taken in our research includes both a qualitative aspect and a quantitative aspect. From a qualitative perspective, we've been conducting interviews with a number of people, and the goal here is to develop a deep and rich understanding of the GENI project and the community from the perspective of many different stakeholders or participants. From a quantitative aspect, we've been conducting a social network analysis of patterns of interactions. And so to date, what we've done is we've attended a number of GECs. We've seen a number of you at the conferences. We've conducted about 50 interviews with different stakeholders. We've also been collecting and analyzing publicly available data, and we've conducted a social network analysis. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Sandy, who's going to talk about the social and network analysis and some of the results.
Okay, so most of you are familiar with computer networks. In a social network, your main players are the people and their interconnections through their communications and interactions. So in a social network analysis, what you're trying to do is often descriptive because it's not clear who's interacting with whom and who might be the most popular person in the community, for example. And we could actually potentially answer that question. So often a social network analysis is trying to uncover the structure of the social network. And why is that important? Why is that important in a project? Well, it reveals who's interacting with whom, who's communicating with whom, who's sharing knowledge with whom. And in fact, the research links a lot of important things like success of projects, innovation, many things like that to the pattern of the social network. So what we thought to do, now ideally what you would like to do, and I've had discussions with some of you, we've talked with some of you in the past about computer networks. Well, unlike a computer network, it's impossible to capture all of the traffic, quote unquote, in a people network. So you often have to sample. That's what social scientists do, is we sample human behavior. And what we decided is we decided to look at the GECs as a sample of the community. And we thought that the GECs are interesting because, first of all, they provide one consistent opportunity for people to get together face to face and interact. They occur regularly over the course of the project. And in that sense, they kind of provide a window on the GENI community. So what did we do? We got all of the publicly available attendee lists for the GECs, and that contains people's name and their institutional affiliation. We also looked at the GENI Wiki to get people's roles and areas and their participation, nature of their participation in GENI. We provided a number of different social network analysis using a tool called UCINet that tries to determine the structure of the social network. And today we don't, unfortunately, have a chance to share all of the results with you. But if you go onto the GENI Wiki, our full slide deck is out there, so you can look at it. So today I'm going to just talk a little bit about our analysis at the person level and at the institutional level. So what we did at the person level is we were looking at not individuals, but the pattern of attendance at the GECs. And let me show you what we did. So if you look here, this happens to be GECs 1 and 2. And the GECs 1 and 2 are each represented by blue triangle, blue rectangles. People are the red dots. And what you'll see is you'll see kind of a cluster of people on each side. Those are people who only attended one of the GECs. The ones in the middle, they attended both GECs, okay? Now, if you repeat this analysis for the whole network, you'll get something like this. And again, you might want to go to the wiki to kind of, because it's a very complicated diagram. In fact, we found that over all of the GECs, there's over 1,000 people, unique people, who have attended the GECs. So you notice a couple things. The first thing is that there's kind of this core or dark area. And those are people who attend multiple GECs. And in fact, they attend at least 5 GECs to be in that core. The other thing you'll notice is that there's people on the edges or periphery. That happens to be about 88% attend maybe one GEC. They're on the periphery. The other thing you'll notice is that the GECs kind of cluster in little groups. And when we overlaid it by the spirals, what you'll see is that people who tend to attend one GEC often do it by spiral. Whereas people who are more in the core, that's about 12% of the attendees, attend across spirals. So you'll see the attendance kind of clumps by spiral. We also looked at whether it's the same people coming or whether there are new people coming. And in fact, GENI seems to represent a very, what you might call, healthy community. 30 or 40% are newcomers to every GEC. As many as 80% will attend multiple GECs. So you have regular attendees, and you also have new people coming in to refresh the community. On average, people attend about 2.5 GECs, although it's probably quite skewed with a few people attending many, many GECs and others attending one. Now, what we also did at the person level is we looked at their role. So are there patterns where certain types of people are coming to more GECs and certain are not? So we identified whether they were part of the GPO, NSF, whether they were a PI, whether they were an experimenter, somebody we called a worker, that could be a student, or it could be a research scientist, someone who's not a PI but is involved in a project, or someone who attended the conference and we couldn't find any role for them on the GENI wiki. So basically what we did is color-coded all of the person dots according to those roles, and you're going to have a hard time seeing here, but what I'm going to tell you is that if you blow it up, in the core are the PIs. The core attendees who attend multiple GECs tend to be PIs, and of course NSF is in the core as well as the GPO, as you might expect. On the periphery tend to be people who don't have a formal role in GENI. They may come once, they may not come again. Also people who are non-PIs working on the projects. Okay. So you'll see about 20% of all attendees are PIs. About 25% are students or others working on the project. 35% are people without any role in GENI, and they tend to be attending only one GEC. Okay, so we also did an analysis at the institution level because we got interested to know at the institution level what kind of institutions are participating. So here again we identified different types of institutions. NSF and BBN, of course, we pulled out. Universities, we also looked at private sector companies, any other sort of governmental institutions, and we also identified foreign versus domestic institutions. And we have a number of different color codes here. I'm sure it's hard for you to see. We also had some hourglass shapes to represent foreign institutions, so we're trying to be creative in ways to identify the pattern. Basically what you'll see, and I'll show you the core again, is you see that on the periphery tend to be the private sector companies, which means they attend one GEC and may not come back again. In the core tend to be the universities. Those are all the yellow dots, and you can see it here as I blow it up. And of course, BBN and NSF are in the core. But the universities are the ones that are forming the core of the GENI community. They're the institutions that are sending people year after year or quarter after quarter to the GECs. And in fact, of all attendees, universities are about 2/3. Companies are about a 1/4, and then others, of course, are split up among other types of institutions. 28% of the attendees were from foreign institutions, interestingly. And that's what we've seen so far. So there's other analysis we've done. We've looked at large versus small institutions, as you might suspect. The larger institutions tend to be in the core, the smaller in the periphery. And we also did an analysis. We thought it might be, I don't know, inflame someone, but we did it by area or cluster. So if you go onto the GENI wiki, you can see which clusters tend to be in the core in terms of sending most people to GECs, which ones are in the periphery. And what you might also notice is sort of over time, you'll notice now that more experimenters are coming to more of the GECs. They're moving more into the core. You'll notice that some of the clusters were involved earlier in more intensity in the GECs, and now not as much. So you're welcome to go onto the wiki to look at the full slide deck. And now Lori's going to just tie up what are the things that we saw as we looked at the data.
I wanted to just offer a few themes that we observed from our analyses just to close out our presentation here. When we first began several years ago collecting data and talking to people and doing some of the analyses, it wasn't clear to us that there was sort of a common vision of what GENI would be, or that that there was a very strong community that was coalescing around the idea of GENI and what that might be. And what we observed over time is is a much stronger coalescing around the GENI project. In fact, we see that there's a very involved core group of participants in the GECs that is growing in size. There are around 150 participants in the core, mostly PIs, as Sandy mentioned. The individuals in the core tend to take on a specific role and belong to a specific cluster. And there are members, there are institutions that send more than one person to the GEC. So that's what makes up the core. So that over time, it certainly appears that a GENI community seems to have taken shape. And that community is growing, and it's organic in terms of the number of participants. It's been evolving and growing over time. There is stability in terms of who's there. They continue to be there in the core, but the core continues to grow as well. In general, the number of attendees at the GECs is growing over time. There are significant numbers of new participants, of students at each GEC, and a significant number of people who attend one GEC also attend the next GEC. So all of this to us suggests that the community is growing and is organic and is strengthening over time. We also find in the data that those who belong participate more, and by that we mean that people who take on a specific role or who participate in a certain cluster are more involved with the GENI project. Most people who are unassociated with a particular cluster or a role only attend, in fact, one GEC. So from this, we conclude that participants who identify with GENI through a GENI cluster or role tend to get more involved in the project and attend more conferences. In the data, we also see that there is a group of institutions that participate in GENI. They have a strong and sustained involvement in GENI, suggesting a strong level of commitment. In fact, approximately 89% of the institutions participate in multiple GECs by sending multiple people from that institution. There are some, we've observed some interesting partnerships and mentorships evolving over time. And again, in the data, you see this, the partnerships between academia and industry, between large and small universities, between research and teaching schools. In terms of the types of institutions attending GECs, it's predominantly from universities. We see a smaller percentage of, smaller proportion of both private and government institutions attending the conferences. And then roughly 28% of the attending institutions to the conferences are international. And finally, we see that social networks are forming within the GENI community. And our observations suggest that GENI has provided tremendous networking opportunities and opportunities for collaboration among different individuals. The high profile of GENI, in fact, seems to provide a form of safety net for junior faculty. And by that we mean that we've observed that the support and the involvement of senior faculty, the support of many institutions has made it easier for junior faculty to also participate and become involved with the GENI community. And finally, the GENI project seems to provide a mechanism for students and researchers from smaller schools to also participate and be integrated into the larger GENI community. And Sandy and I would both like to thank everybody for their participation and continued involvement with our efforts. And if you have any questions or comments, we would be more than happy to talk with you. Thank you.